So I come to you with the great hope that we can create many more people who would like to go to crisis camp and be the type of people that Andy has been working with. But we have a problem, and I'm going to present that problem to you guys. I'm going to present you guys with a cautionary tale. Basically, everything that I've learned about media and its effects actually happened in New Guinea. And it happened in a place where there really is no media. So I'm going to take you into the village here. Just on a little virtual experience here. You fly into this airstrip here, and you walk for a couple days, and you end up in villages like this. And these are places that are really completely off the grid. There's no electricity, no running water, certainly no internet access. And it's in places like this you'll see people they grow their own food. Here's like a big feast here. Here's, they raise pigs. They have taro and sweet potato. They're also opportunistic, so after a big rain, the spiders and the spider webs come down from the trees and they can harvest the eggs and the spiders and so on. They're also, if they're really lucky, they can catch a snake, and the time to catch a snake is right after it's eaten. So it actually turns out it's a 2-for-1 deal. You not only get the snake, but you get what was in the snake. And I show you this picture because this is really the beginning of what became my focus. This snake was found about 100 feet from where I was staying, which is this house there on the left where those two young boys are standing. And this is actually me inside the house here. These are actually my legs up in the upper right-hand corner. And I'm sitting in this house, and every night I would actually cover myself up in the sleeping bag. I've only been there a week, so I'm still pretty nervous about my surroundings, and there's bugs everywhere. So I'd just seal myself up in the sleeping bag every night. And that night I was especially worried because we'd just eaten this snake, so I'm thinking, okay, my snake karma is not very good, and there's all these holes everywhere. So I wrapped myself up in this thing. But as some of you know, we're about 4 degrees from the equator, so it gets very hot at night, and the sleeping bag comes off of me. And that very night, I wake up, and the sleeping bag is off of me in the middle of the night, and I wake up, and there's this thing laying across my chest. It's about this big around. And so I freak out, and I grab it with my left hand, and I throw it off of me. But as I throw it, I roll with it. And so somehow I'm wrapped up in this thing. But I managed to get it pinned down with my left hand. And it's pitch dark. I can't really see anything. But I got pinned down with my left hand. And I try to move my right arm so I can pin it down with 2 arms. But I can't move my right arm. And it's about this time I realize I've actually pinned down my own right arm like this. And what had happened is my arm had fallen asleep, and it was across me like this. And so it turns out there was no snake. And then I have to explain to these people, I barely speak the language, and I have to explain why I'm wrestling with myself on the ground. And all of this sounds like great fun, but this is actually horrible. This is the beginning of the worst culture shock experience I've ever had. And for those of you who've ever had culture shock, the worst of it is that you really have lost yourself. You've lost your identity. Nobody knows who you are, what you're saying. None of the things that you're saying make any sense to them. Not just saying in words, but also, the way you dress doesn't make sense. None of the signals you're sending off make any sense. So you're really like a child again. This is actually why anthropologists do what we do. We want to become children again and learn a new world in a new way with open eyes. And so that's essentially what I had to do. I had to be a child again, learn how to be in this other world. And as I was navigating this world, which is completely unmediated in any sense that we think of the word, I realized that it was very different. And one of the main differences is that people here are not so concerned about who they are with their identity, but they're more concerned with their relationships. And that comes from the fact that they basically know everybody that they ever see. And secondly, they don't have CVs and resumes and Facebook profiles and all that stuff as external representations of themselves, which convince us that we need to really be careful about how we present ourselves and so on. So this was a really different kind of world where they're focused more on relationships than who they are. And here is another example. This is a dispute resolution. And what's interesting about this is that when somebody does something wrong in the village, they are not put on trial as an individual. Instead, the relationship that they violated is put on trial, and they try to heal that relationship in these open forums. And so I became really interested in the differences between sort of an unmediated world and a mediated world. And just as I started to become interested in this, new media came in. And new media came in a very simple way. It came in the form of books, mostly census books and maps. And what had happened is a handful of people in the area had become literate, and they became the arms of the state, and they were going to census and map this area. One of the first thing that happened that was indicative of big changes to come was that just as they were trying to create the census, they found that a lot of people didn't have a fixed name. People actually had to invent a fixed name for the census book. So the fixed book was actually creating the need for a fixed name. Same thing with villages. These villages are constantly moving traditionally as relationships change, the villages change. They change shape, and normally the houses sort of face each other in a way that indicates the type of relationship people have with each other. These villages were often burned or otherwise abandoned and recreated, like the one on the bottom here you see, which is actually the houses here are lined up and numbered to match the census book. So it's like the census book was actually rewriting the society itself. And then disputes that used to be handled like this, where they were focused on the relationship and healing the relationship, instead were taken into the courthouse where individuals were held up against the letter of the law. Within a few weeks, this culture was almost unrecognizable, and even the people who had been the architects of these changes, who had tried to make these changes, didn't like what the culture had become. And this has gone on now for several years. They're still struggling with these changes that have happened. And so the lesson here that I want to get across is, first off, that sometimes, even when we try to use media, the media actually uses us. And secondly, that these changes affected everybody. So there's no opting out of new media. A new media comes into a society and it changes the society as a whole, and we all are a part of those changes. It's not something you can opt out of. And thirdly, that media are not just tools, that they're not just means of communication. The media mediate relationships, and they mediate how people are connected, who is connected to who, what is connected to what. And when you add it all up, when media change, relationships change, and the whole structure of society can change. So here we are with this new media. And I want to mention that my friends in New Guinea, when those books came in, they embraced those books with such great hope and enthusiasm. And they thought this was going to change the world. This was going to help them develop into a better future. And now we have this new media, and we think, okay, we're going to develop this into a whole new future. And Andy just displayed just how hopeful this can be. But I want to say that this is really, we're like on a razor's edge right now between these hopeful possibilities and more ominous futures, you might say. So on the one hand, you could say there's this hope for openness and freedom, but on the other side of that razor's edge is more possibilities for surveillance and control. There is more hope for transparency and also new opportunities for deception. There's new hope for mass participation, and yet we all see possibilities for mass distraction as well. So what we need is we need people, we need our students, we need everybody to be more open, caring, daring, creative, collaborative, self-motivated, and voracious as learners. And yet, this is where we are training them, right? So we've got a problem here. This is my class back at Kansas State University. And regardless of what I say in this room, the room itself, the walls, are sending a different message. The walls are sending the message that, first off, that to learn is to acquire information. And this is a very low base level of how we should think about learning. They also say that you should listen to the authority for good information, that authorized information is beyond discussion. That's why the chairs don't turn towards one another so people can discuss the matter. Ultimately, these walls send the message that you should obey the authority and follow along. And if you want a measurement of whether or not we are creating the open, daring, caring, creative, collaborative, and voracious learners that we hope to create in this classroom, all you have to do is pay attention to the questions that they ask. Because if you think about a good question is a type of question that will lead the student on a lifetime of learning. But when you look at the questions they ask in this room, it's questions like this. How many points is this worth? How long does this paper need to be? What do we need to know for this test? These are all the types of questions that actually limit learning. They're actually asking you, how much do I need to learn? Because I don't want to learn too much here. And of course, they're all preparing for the big exam. So my students, we set up a camera and they gave us a few of these confessions here, buying $100 textbooks that they never open, paying for class but not showing up. We did a survey and found that they only complete 49% of the readings assigned to them, but even worse, they find only 26% relevant to their life, which is basically a 74% failure rate on our part. Or you can look at this as our grade. Like we get a 26%, that's our report card. Because if it's not relevant to them, then they're not getting anything out of it. It's no wonder that they're checking out of class. You know, they bring their laptop to class, but they're not working on class stuff. They end up Facebooking through most of their classes. And these things, while they seem disruptive, and you hear a lot of faculty complaining about the Facebooking in class and so on, it's also an indication that there's something in the air, that there's roughly, you know, what it is it's that, you know, the 2 billion people on the planet who are connecting in new ways that they've never connected before. It looks something like this. And if you were, you know, this is really just the beginning, considering that we're headed towards ubiquitous networks, ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous information, unlimited speed about everything, everywhere, from anywhere, and all kinds of devices. And it makes exams like this seem especially silly. So it's time that we move our students from being knowledgeable, that is just knowing a bunch of stuff, to being knowledge-able, that is able to find, analyze, criticize, and ultimately create information, able to see new connections and create new connections. And we need this more than ever right now because this is actually a lie. I just slipped it past you a few seconds ago, but it's a total lie because in fact we're not headed towards this. We are and always will be in a situation where we have almost unlimited information at almost unlimited speed about almost everything, almost everywhere, from almost anywhere, and all kinds of devices. And the almost is where it is the site of our most important battles to come. It's the place where we'll have the battles over privacy, security, about who will have a voice and who won't have a voice, who will know, who won't know, what we will know, and what will remain unknown. And for that, we need these open, caring, voracious learners. This will be exactly what we make of it. So I'll end with a few examples of what might be done, even in a room like this. So first off, part of the solution might be in this message itself, because the message I just gave you was actually crafted by those 200 students you just saw. We opened up a Google document. We all put in our own input. We had about 400 edits from these 200 students, and that created the script for a video that many of you have seen. Almost 4 million people saw it. And the reason why all those people saw it is because all of us worked together to get that video out. It wasn't my production, it was all of our production. Anybody who ever blogged about it, tweeted about it, sent it around, that's what got it around. And more than that, there were people, volunteers all over the world who were helping to translate it into Spanish, Italian, Greek, French, and Arabic. So within a few months after we had this little exercise in our classroom, this video was out all over the world, and everybody was seeing it. But of course, we can do more than this. We can recognize that the message here is that these walls don't matter. And if we take this into a small classroom, here's another example here. This is a class where you normally have a syllabus. Instead, we have a research schedule. Any student at any time can edit the research schedule. We have a simple goal. We're going to produce a documentary for the world that the world cares about, something relevant to the students and to the world. Each student produces their own little segment of the documentary. We put it all together. And instead of a bunch of blue books in an essay form that you throw in the trash at the end of the semester, we have a documentary at the end that over 1 million people see. But that's just in a small class. If you start thinking of your students as participants, as opportunities instead of burdens, then the bigger class actually becomes a bigger opportunity, and more possibilities emerge. So in this class, which is Introduction to Cultural Anthropology, which is a study of all humans in all times and all places, if I could only get the wisdom of all of these people engaged in that project, we could do much more than, say, just I could do alone. So what we do is we lay a map on top of the students. Each of the students goes to a different spot on this map and becomes an expert in that part of the world. We build up a wiki, and we end up with hundreds of pages of information and knowledge built by the students themselves about these different places in the world. And before long, they know more about the world collectively than I do, which becomes a very interesting situation for the classroom itself. And not only do they know a lot about the world, they know a lot about the world's problems. They recognize that half the world is making less than $2 a day. We have about 1 billion people hungry or malnourished. We have the energy crisis, pollution crisis, climate crisis, and so on. And the question of the course becomes why. And they design a world simulation, each of the students with their own expertise builds rules for a simulation or a game that will help us simulate world history so that we can basically reproduce all the problems that we see in the world today, so we can see the structure and the processes that create those problems, and then we can try to solve them. And so in doing this, of course, we have to move out of the classroom. We find any space anywhere that we can. This is in a rodeo arena here. And in the process, you know, I think ultimately the best part of this is that the simulation itself almost always fails. We never solve world problems. We often don't even simulate world history just right. But in the process, we fail in the best way possible because they leave with questions, and they're not the question of what do we need to know for this test, but what do we need to know for this test. Thanks.